We'd spoken yesterday about the oil for the menorah, that the menorah represents Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral law. It's the elucidation of the Torah Shabbat, and all the divine assistance, the Siyata Dishmaya, which we received to give us the ability to come upon the truth of Torah, emanates from the lighting of the menorah. As the Midrash tells us that the purest flame, the clearest light, comes from the burning of olive oil. Other fuels, it's not as pure. So when we speak about clarity, illumination, oil provides that level of illumination. It seems to be over here, there's a personalization. You should command them. And they should take the oil, which is pure, which is pressed specifically for illumination. They should take it for you, on your behalf. It seems to be when we speak about the oil, there's a personalization between the taking of the oil and the producing of the pure olive oil. It's something very personal to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the teacher of Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu, Torah Tziv Lono Moshe, the conduit for the transmission of Torah was Moshe Rabbeinu. We find Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's giving Musar to Klal Yisrael 36 days before he passes away, he tells them that I was in heaven to receive the Torah for 40 days and 40 nights. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Lechem lo ochalti mayim lo shosisi. And during that 40-day period that I was in heaven to receive the Torah, I did not eat bread and I did not drink water. That's what he shares with them. The question is, what relevance does that have to do with the rebuke? And what is he communicating to them? That when he received the Torah during this 40-day period, 40 days and 40 nights, he was not involved at all in the eating or drinking process. What exactly is he communicating? So the Midrash tells us what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to Klal Yisrael, that how does one have the greater capacity to be worthy of the Siyata Dishmaya, to process and come upon the truth of Torah? You have to be willing to forego many of the physical amenities of life. And what he said was, Kimel shemosarti, domi v'chel bioleo, as I gave my fat and my blood for the sake of the acquisition of Torah, if you want to have a greater ability to acquire Torah, you have to forego many of the amenities of life to be worthy to receive the Torah. As we read in Pirkei Avos, that we say, if you want to acquire the crown of Torah, pas b'melech tochal, mayim b'sura tishter, you should eat bread and salt. Meaning, we're talking about the basic subsistence of life. Pas b'melech tochal, mayim b'sura tishter, water in small measures. Al oretz tishan, and even if you have to sleep on the ground, v'chaytzar tichya, and you have to even willing to live a life of tsar, of pain, of deprivation for the sake of Torah. If a person is willing to make those levels of sacrifice, even to forego the most basic amenities of life, that person has the greater capacity to be able to acquire the Torah and come upon its truth. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is communicating to them. Keshem shemosarti, I did not eat bread, I did not drink water 40 days and 40 nights. Only because of that, I had a greater capacity to be able to receive the Torah and to be conduit to transmit the Torah to you people and to be able to come upon its truth. The oil of the kindling in the menorah, which is the purest, which is crushed, which is pressed for illumination, as Rashi says, only the first droplet of oil that was extracted from the olive did it qualify for the kindling. That was the only droplet that qualified, and it was crushed. This is the quality of Torah, which is personal to you. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is actually, he is the ultimate level of what? Of the understanding of Torah. And he was the only one who was qualified to receive the Torah. It's interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen to be the Redeemer of Israel, to be the Goel. What was the objective of leaving Egypt, of Gulas Mitzrayim? As he said to Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush, that ultimately they should be at that mountain. They should stand at that mountain, which is Har Elokim, the mountain of God, to receive the Torah. The only one who was qualified to be the recipient of Torah on behalf of Klal Yisrael was only Moshe Rabbeinu. He was the only one who was qualified. And yet we find that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was returning to Egypt with his family to be the Goel, because he hesitated to circumcise his second child, a serpent came and swallowed him from his feet to his waist, above his waist, and from his head down to his waist, which Zipporah, his wife, realized that his life is in jeopardy because he did not circumcise his child, Eliezer. She immediately took a stone, she circumcised the child, and she took the orla, the foreskin, she threw it before the serpent, and the serpent went away. Moshe Rabbeinu could have been killed. He was not killed because Zipporah intervened and circumcised the child. If Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one qualified to receive the Torah on behalf of Klal Yisrael at Sinai, if he would have been killed, you understand, there wouldn't have been a Gula. Because if the objective of leaving Egypt is only Kabbalas Torah at Sinai, and the only one who's qualified to receive the Torah is Moshe Rabbeinu, if that's the case, how is it possible Hashem should allow him to be killed because he was hesitant, he delayed, he tarried in regard to the mitzvah of circumcision? But yet the Torah tells us clearly that if Zipporah wouldn't have intervened at that moment, he would have died. If he would have died, the Jews would have never left Egypt, because the only value of leaving Egypt is Kabbalas Torah at Sinai. It's a question I once asked. Now, what precipitated the bondage of Egypt? So we mentioned the Medrash. The Medrash says, Medrash Tanchuma, that after that generation passed away, the generation that originally came to Mitzrayim with Yaakov, the Jews, they took another direction. And they said, Anachnu niyak Mitzrayim. We want to be like the Egyptians. As the Egyptians are uncircumcised, we want to be uncircumcised. And they stopped circumcising themselves. And if Hashem, as Hashem says, if you people stop circumcising yourselves, until now, although you were esteemed and revered by the Egyptians and they loved you, now they will become your arch enemies. They will see you with the most negative light because you stopped circumcising yourselves. So what precipitated the shibud? The bondage which brought about all the influences, all the effect of the evil. We became idolaters. It was because they stopped circumcising themselves. Because the Milah is the Os Bris Kodesh. That's the sign, holy sign of the covenant with Hashem. So if the Jews said, it's not important for us, we don't value that, the Os Bris Kodesh, the sign of the covenant, if that Hashem says, if that's the case, you're going to hear the music. You're going to feel the pain. So what brought about the shibud? The non-circumcision. So if Moshe Rabbeinu the Goel, he himself is somehow delinquent because he tarried in regard to the circumcision, this will not allow him to be qualified to be the Goel. Because the only reason why the Shibud came about was only because they didn't circumcise themselves. So Moshe the Goel, who himself has to be above anything that has relevance to that level of failing, there's no question that's going to interfere, not allow the Jews to leave Egypt. But factually, Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one who was qualified to be the Redeemer, only because he was the one who was meant to go at Sinai to ascend to receive the Torah on behalf of Klal Yisrael. V'yiku eilecha shemen zayzoch kosis lamor. It's something which is personalized. The Torah is personalized to Moshe Rabbeinu because Moshe Rabbeinu is Rabbeinu. So the siyata d'shmaya, the divine assistance to come upon the truth, you have to have that level of illumination. That's what's represented through the olive oil, and that's something personal to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Balaturma, if you take a look, it's very interesting. The only parsha in the Torah, in Shmos, going forward, Moshe Rabbeinu is not mentioned, is in this portion, the portion of Tetzaveh. It's interesting. You would think every parsha Moshe Rabbeinu is mentioned, and in this parsha, he's not mentioned. And what is this parsha? There's the parsha of what? Of Torah. We're speaking about the kindling of the menorah, the oil that qualifies. It's only the purest. So why is he not mentioned? So if you take a look in the Balaturim says, Lo hiskiv Moshe b'zeh seder. In this order, Moshe Rabbeinu is not mentioned. Mash'enki b'chol ha'chumash. Shemishoshen oled Moshe ein seder shlo huskabar. From the moment Moshe was born, there's no order in the Torah going forward with Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. Latam, why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem after the Chet Egel, Hashem says, I will destroy Klal Yisrael. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, if you're going to destroy Klal Yisrael, erase me from your book. I don't want to be mentioned in your book. So although he didn't destroy them, because he supplicated and prayed for the forgiveness, the kilas chocham afilo tanai bo, a curse of a chocham, even on a conditional curse, has its impact, has its effect. So since he said, if you destroy them, although he didn't destroy them, but a kilas chocham, the curse of a chocham, even on a condition, finds its mark. The Gemara tells us, it's Gemara Makos, which he's citing, Yehuda, he accepted responsibility for Binyamin, and he said that if I don't return Binyamin, I should be excommunicated from this world and the world to come. Although he did bring back Binyamin. So the Gemara says, for 40 years, Yehuda's neshama was not admitted into Yeshiva Shel Ma'ala, into the heavenly Torah Academy, until Moshe Rabbeinu prayed that his neshama should be admitted. Why? Because since he excommunicated himself, if he doesn't bring back Binyamin from the world to come, although he did bring back Binyamin, but a kilas chocham, a curse of a chocham, even on a condition, and even if the condition is met, nevertheless it finds its mark. And that's why Yehuda's remains, as it says, they shook for 40 years when they transported all the Shvatim's remains, and his neshama was not admitted into Yeshiva Shel Ma'ala because he was in an excommunicated state to a degree because he had said that. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, if you destroy them, although he didn't destroy them, but since it was a condition and a chacham says a curse, therefore it found its mark. So therefore, how did it manifest itself that this parsha, which is his parsha, which is the Torah, which is Shemen Zay Zoch Kosis Lamor, his name is not mentioned in this parsha for that reason. That's one reason. Another reason, he explains, the Ode, the Zua Parsha Medaberes B'Tachsisei Kuna. It speaks about all the protocols of the Kuna. Because after this, what do we speak about? We speak about the vestments that are worn by Aaron, who's going to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and his children. And these vestments are lechover tiferes. Moshe Rabbeinu, because of what happened at the burning bush, where he was obstinate, although his original intention was as a result of humility, because he was concerned for his older brother, that his older brother somehow would be offended if he would be the Goel. And that's why he had this dialogue. But when he crossed the line where Hashem answered every one of his reasons, and he still said, choose Aaron to be the one to be your spokesman. Hashem says, if that is the case, Aaron will be the Kohen. You forfeited the right to the Kuna, to the priesthood. So because this is something which is so painful to Moshe Rabbeinu, all the protocols of Kuna, of priesthood, the vestments and what they are in the Kohen Gadol, therefore this particular parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most qualified one to be the Kohen Gadol and be the Kohanim. Because he was obstinate and he refused to go to do Hashem's agency, it was taken from him and was given to Aaron. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned in this portion. Because of it would aggravate Moshe Rabbeinu. It would pain him because of tzavo b'menorah. That's something else. So he's offering two reasons why Moshe Rabbeinu's name is omitted in this parsha. Firstly, because he said, and secondly, because he had forfeited the kuna because of what happened. The Gemara tells us that a mesarvin legodol. If a person is asked to go to the Amud, Jay likes to go to the Amud. Whenever it was Rosh Chodesh, if he could say Hallel, he offered his services immediately. But the Gemara says that if he asked to go to the Amud, initially, you should turn down the honor. Due to humility, you should turn down the honor. And if you're asked the second time, you should indicate you're going, then you say, find someone else. The third time you're asked, then you must accept if you're qualified. Why? Because that's already a disrespect. First time, for the sake of humility, you have a right to say, find someone else. I'm not really qualified. I'm not looking for that honor. The second time, you make a movement, but then you withdraw. And third time, it would be a disrespect. But let's say a person of special status asks you to go, you have an obligation to go immediately. Aim is sarvin the godel. One doesn't refuse if a godel asks you something, somebody of a certain stature asks you to do something. If he's asking you, it's not the place to display humility. You have to accept the charge immediately and go and do what you're asked to do. Aim is sarvin the godel. All the questions Moshe Rabbeinu asked, although it was for the sake of humility, they were valid questions, although it was emanating from his humility. But once Hashem answered every one of his questions, if Hashem is asking you to go, how do you hesitate? How do you turn it down? It's a disrespect. If he chose you, that means you're the one who's the most qualified. Therefore, that he was obstinate after every issue was addressed, it was considered a disrespect. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu forfeited the kuna for that reason. Okay, that's the takeaway from Moshe Rabbeinu. Why he forfeited the kuna became a mesarvin legodol. So Moshe Rabbeinu's name is omitted in this parsha because we speak about Aaron, his vestments, which are lekoved l'seferes, and other things. Therefore, it would be agmas nefesh. It would cause him this pain that due to his lack of clarity at this moment, his humility overtook him, and since it was inappropriate, therefore he forfeited the kuna. But I just want to mention the famous Orach Chaim HaKodesh here. He cites a Zohar, if you have the Mikros Gedolish, he says, U'b'derech remes, on an illusionary level. Yizbar HaKoso Derech Maimer Huva b'Sefer Zohar Chodosh, which is brought in the Sefer in the Zohar. Ki Daled Gol Yishel Yisrael, the 4 exiles. We spoke about Bavel, Parsamodai, Yavon, and Edom, the 4 exiles. Kol echad mehem niglu b'menu b'schus echad. Ultimately, we redeemed for every one of them in someone's merit. Golus Harisha niglu b'schus Avram Avinu alav hashalom. This is the Zohar. We redeemed from Bavel, ultimately in the schus of Avram Avinu. Beis, the 2nd exile, which is Parsa Modai, b'schus Yitzchak. Gimel, the 3rd exile, which is Yavon, b'schus Yaakov. Hadalid, yeah, but I just want to make it interesting. It says Yavon. How is Yavon alluded to in the Torah at the time of creation? It says Choshech al pnei sahom. There was darkness over the deep waters. So why is Yavon Choshech? Shechoshchu eineim shel Yisrael b'gzeirosam. They blackened our eyes with their decrees. What did they write on? On what was that decree? Kiswal keren hashor ein lanu chel l'Elokei Yisrael. Write on the horn of an ox that you have no share in the Torah, in the God of Israel. Now, night, who represents nighttime? It says Yaakov Tikin Arvis. Yaakov promulgated the Arvis, the nighttime service. Yaakov is the Av of Golus, is the Av of the patriarch of exile. What's exile? That is night. It's night. There's total confusion. Yavon, who was Choshech eineim shel Yisrael b'gzeirosam, they wanted to uproot the Torah. That was their objective. Not allowing circumcision, not allowing the study of Torah. Therefore, in the merit of Yaakov, who's Torah, in his merit, we were actually removed, we were extricated, redeemed from that Golus. Vadalid, the 4th exile, which is Edom, totally b'schus Moshe. That's based on Moshe's schus. Now, what's Edom? Edom is what? Hayadayim de Esav, right? Yitzchak had said to Yaakov, Hakol kol Yaakov Yadayim de Esav. And the Medrash tells us the only time the Yadayim is de Esav is when the kol is not kol Yaakov. If the kol is kol Yaakov, we're not vulnerable to Esav's oppression and attack. So if the Torah is at that special level, then Esav is kept at bay. So when it will be redeemed from that, the Golus of Edom, in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu personifies Torah at the most advanced level. That's why this is the most lengthy Golus, exile. Until we engage in Torah mitzvahs, a Moshe chovetz ligol im batlonim min Torah. If the Jews themselves are not sufficiently involved in the study of Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu will not allow his merit to be used, that we should be redeemed and extricated from this exile. V'zehu she'ramaz hakosef kan. And that's what the Torah is alluding to in regard to the oil that's used for the menorah. Va'ato tetzavis b'nei Yisrael. You must command it, b'nei Yisrael. Al derech ki ma'alochav yitzavaloch. Derech omram ein tzav el malchus. Tzav is what? That represents royalty. Ki yimloch aleinu lo'osid. Utenayu hadov sheyask Yisrael b'Torah. There's a prerequisite to be extricated from the exile. We must engage in Torah study. V'zehu omro v'yikhu eilecha shem zayzoch. They must take the oil for you on your behalf. Yirmos el Torah shenimshel l'shemen, ma'shemen ner la'olam kach Torah. Just as oil illuminates the world, the Torah brings about illumination. It must be pure. It's not only olive oil, which illuminates, but it's the purest of olive oil. You have to study Torah lishma, for the sake of Torah, without any sediment. Shem lekantir chas v'sholem. What is shlo lishma? That if a person has the sinister use it as a weapon against others to further your cause. Gadel, or for the sake of your own ego. That is the shmorel. That is the sediment. That's the impurity which is intermingled when you study Torah Shlo Lishmo. V'omar od kosis, it's pressed, it's crushed. You have to forego all the physical amenities when you study Torah, even willing to sacrifice. Al derech omro, zosa Torah, odom kiyomus. This is the Torah, odom kiyomus v'oer. If you're willing to forego the physical amenities, only then do you acquire Torah at its proper level.